Thank you to Bernard McKirk, who has a profound thought to leave you off with this afternoon. Bernie?
Listen, it's sunny in New York, folks. Ladies and gentlemen, it's sunny and 65 degrees. Tomorrow's going to be 75 degrees. We're going to enjoy the hell out of it. And stay strong, President Trump. We're with you, my brother.
We'll keep that one for the real. That's fun. Okay, we are back Monday at noon Eastern Time. Outnumbered Overtime with Melissa starts right now.
Fox News alert, President Trump blasting James Comey's bombshell tell-all. This is Outnumbered Overtime. I'm Melissa Francis, and today for Harris Faulkner. The president hitting back on allegations in the FBI director's new book, which depict him as unethical and, quote, untethered to the truth. The president tweeting, James Comey is a proven leaker and liar. Virtually everyone in Washington thought he should be fired for the terrible job he did until he was, in fact, fired. He leaked classified information for which he should be prosecuted. He lied to Congress under oath. Among the claims in the book, Comey likens the president to a crime boss, writing, quote, I once again was having flashbacks to my earlier career as a prosecutor against the mob, the silent circle of assent, the boss in complete control, the loyalty oaths, the us versus them worldview, the lying about all things large and small in service of some code of loyalty that put the organization above morality and above the truth. White House correspondent Kevin Corke joins us from the North Lawn, where there is no shortage of news, my friend. Go ahead.
Boy, let me tell you, what a crazy morning. When those tweets came out, we were all reading them thinking, I wonder what this day is going to be like. Never would I have predicted it would be like this. Now, listen, White House officials, quite frankly, are sort of looking at it this way, Melissa. They're saying, this guy is not under oath. He's out here trying to sell a book. He's intentionally wanting to be provocative. But the president himself is not taking this with a grain of salt. No. He's a bit less measured than that. Let me take you back to Twitter and share something else the commander-in-chief had to say about the former FBI director. He calls him an untruthful slimeball who was, as time has proven, a terrible director of the FBI. He goes on to say his handling of the crooked Hillary Clinton case and the events surrounding it will go down as one of the worst botched jobs of history. It was my great honor to fire James Comey. Wow. Now, the book itself is called A Higher Loyalty, Truth, Lies, and Leadership. Now, here's some of the things that the former director is suggesting in the book. He says, as you pointed out, the president is untethered to the truth, has never recoiled from causing another person pain. He suggested he was unethical. And as you also pointed out, he likened him to being a mob boss. Now, as for Comey's view, his backers contend, look, these are the words of a man who is a patriot and a lifelong public servant. But there are some White House officials who are, let's just say, questioning his recollection.
He's a psychoanalyst. He's giving advice on how people look. He's a marriage counselor. I find that particular excerpt to be really egregious and over the top and unacceptable. And I hope people of all political stripes, including those who didn't like Jim Comey in late October 2016, to really push back on it.
Well, I suspect we'll hear just a bit more about this topic at the briefing this afternoon. Nah, you don't think that'll happen to you, Melissa? No? No chance?
I don't think anyone's going to ask about it. Yeah, I think it's just going to go right by. Never
just
happen.
Another Friday right here at the White House.
Perfect. All right. For more reaction, let's bring in our first guest, former Utah Congressman and Fox News contributor Jason Chaffetz. I mean, what's your reaction? Is this what you expected from this?
I have not read the whole book. From the excerpts I've seen, though, I guess what's most surprising is the discontent or the disconnection with Loretta Lynch. I mean, to go so far as to suggest that they weren't on the same page, that there were real problems with the objectivity of the Attorney General herself and her proximity to Hillary Clinton. He went to extraordinary actions, but based on what I've heard, there really are no bombshells. But that would be probably the biggest takeaway that I've seen so far. The other stuff is just petty. I think it's beneath the office and what he said. But Loretta Lynch, that's a whole different story.
I've heard a lot of people, who would like to see the president impeached on television, sort of saying that there are a lot of bombshells in this book. And if there was something of that nature that would be even lead a trail towards impeachment, would it be appropriate to reveal it in a book, or as a law enforcement official, would he have had the duty to bring that to law enforcement authorities?
Well, he had multiple opportunities in front of Congress. That's why you have congressional hearings. And he was asked multiple times over I don't know how many hours. None of these types of things really surfaced. And so it does question how honest he was. Remember, it was Senator Grassley who asked him very specifically, were you party to leaking of information? We found out later that the answer is yes, but he said no. When John Radcliffe asked him when he made the decision to exonerate Hillary Clinton, he said it was after her interview. But all of the notes and the details of this actually suggest that no, he had been working on that for months. And so the biggest bombshell, the thing America should read and pay attention to, will be the Inspector General report, and that's about 2 weeks out as best I can tell.
I guess one of the things, if you're looking at what this tells you about James Comey, one of the quotes that I've seen so far in the book that caused me the most pause was where he said that, you know, when he was going out and he was talking about the emails that came up on Anthony Weiner's laptop, and he said that he was operating under the assumption, like everyone else around him, that Hillary Clinton was going to be the next president. And he was worried about not wanting her presidency to be illegitimate. And he's like, if the polls had been closer or Donald Trump had been ahead, I might have acted differently. I don't know. The idea that he's making law enforcement decisions based on a false notion of how a political election is going to come out. I mean, doesn't that fly in the face of what he's supposed to be doing as a law enforcement official?
Oh, Melissa, you have hit it right on the head. To do it the way he did it was absolutely wrong. And remember, every single Democrat was going to fire James Comey the moment they could possibly do it, because they felt that he meddled in the election. And I think the Democrats actually have a point that he didn't do the same thing about Donald Trump, who they were looking at. I think the Democrats have a valid point. Washington, D.C., on both sides of the aisle, did not like Director Comey, and there's not a single person that would ever vote to reconfirm him. But he was playing politics. To suggest that they review, I think it was hundreds of thousands of emails and information in a few hours, what ended up being a couple of days, is a ridiculous notion. There's no way they were possibly doing those types of things. So I think you're absolutely right.
James Comey's going to make a lot of money off the book. I mean, it's out there. Everybody's talking about it. What do you think are the long-term political implications of it, if anything?
Well, I hope this is a strong signal that those that are playing politics at the top of the food chain have got to be rooted out. This is not something they should have been involved and engaged in. And there should not be a double standard if your name is Clinton. I mean, at the end of the day, this is still about Hillary Clinton, who on the very day she started her Senate confirmation, she set up her own private email. She was trying to subvert the process. And there's a consequence to that. It still comes back to Hillary Clinton herself.
Jason Chaffetz, thank you.
Thanks, Melissa.
Fox News alert for you. New fallout from the FBI raids earlier this week targeting President Trump's longtime attorney, Michael Cohen. Lawyers for the president and Cohen telling a federal judge that material seized is protected by attorney-client privilege. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live in Washington with the latest. Catherine.
Well, thank you, Melissa. The hearing resumes just an hour from now in a New York federal court. And based on the court action this morning, a decision on the Cohen search warrant and the evidence is on hold until Monday. The raids executed earlier this week on Cohen's office, apartment, and hotel room seized business records and at least one computer and cell phone. Court must decide what evidence is fair game and not shielded by attorney-client privilege. One argument is that Cohen functions much more as a businessman and a fixer for the president and would not be covered. In court, the two sides debated this morning the use of a so-called clean team. That's usually composed of FBI agents or a federal magistrate who reviews the material and determines what is in the scope of the warrant and what has to be excluded based on attorney-client privilege. Also today, lawyers for ABC News and the New York Times were in court to argue for access to the court records and that the process should be as transparent as possible. Also on deck, the lawyer for Stormy Daniels, and he backed that request.
We don't know the full scope of everything that was seized. We are not privy to that information, but as a general proposition, we believe as much information about this process should be made public as possible. We're going to fight on behalf of the public and the press for that access.
Lawyer representing President Trump said there are major issues here to be resolved. The first impacts the President of the United States. The second applies to press freedom. And the third applies to every American who's hired a lawyer and wants those communications to remain private. Melissa.
Absolutely. Great reporting, Catherine Herridge, as always.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. For more on this, let's bring in Doug Burns. He is former federal prosecutor and defense attorney. Let me start with the idea of the clean team. Is it too late for that? I mean, have they already looked through what they got?
Well, you kind of have the academics and you have the real world. Academically, the clean team goes in first, okay?
Right.
And they
It's too
look
late for
through
that.
and they try to find out what's privileged and they put it to the side. And more importantly, they then don't participate in the investigation. However, no less a figure than Professor Dershowitz, and he's so right. I agree with him 1,000%. Says, wait a minute, come on. Those are a little bit too fine distinctions, okay? It's the same group of agents. They're all involved, and it's the same branch of government. So what the professor said, and what I say, Melissa, is you should have maybe an independent monitor or have a judge, somebody outside of the FBI, outside of the executive branch, participate in figuring out what's privileged and what isn't. So I suspect that that was a lot of the discussion today. Your Honor, we would like some court intervention to give more clear guidance as to what's privileged
But where
and what
is
isn't.
that stuff right now? And have they started looking through it?
No, it's a great question. What happens is they go in and they do the search, and ostensibly, some people call it a taint team. One expert told me the Southern District calls it a wall team, but we get the idea. The point is, it would be walled off, quite honestly. Whatever.
No one's been near it yet.
Yeah, exactly. And
no one's been near it.
Right. Except the wall agents, Melissa, are allowed to look at it. But again, these are very fine distinctions, and I endorse, not to be a broken record, having either an independent monitor or the judge be involved.
Yeah. What about this other point of media access here? What did you think they'll get it? What does it mean?
Well, no, it's very common. Obviously, the media steps forward. They want to be involved, particularly in this type of situation. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but I don't think they'll get it right now.
Yeah. He's been painted as a fixer. There's a lot of evidence that makes it seem like he's operated as a fixer as opposed to a personal attorney. What, in the legal sense, what's the difference, if any?
That's a great distinction you're drawing, because a lot of people are saying that if a lawyer is acting as, for example, a couple hypotheticals, a business partner or a business advisor, not in the role of an attorney, that can be outside of the scope of the privilege.
Is that true?
Yes, that is true. But again, it's very difficult, you know, it's hard to say that, you know, a file from a lawyer's office involving a client or even a business advisor, I would certainly endorse 1,000% erring on the side of caution, seriously, in terms of whether or not, to your question, you're going to categorize it as attorney-client privilege. You got to be careful.
In this case, you know, what would you imagine? What would make him more of a business partner? Is it whether he was investing, accepting payment? I mean, if he was just negotiating various deals, even some of the things you hear about, you know, with getting paid for speaking and this and that, I mean, that lawyers and agents do that.
Well, the quick hypothetical would be, you know, he's simply a partner in a deal, you know, you follow me? But the minute there's advice, okay, or what we would call attorney work product, seriously.
Attorney work product.
Yeah,
that's
kind of the key term. Then it's going to be different. And again, you have to be very careful, because this privilege concept, not to get on a big soapbox, but I mean, it goes to other people. In other words, if an attorney's office is raided, well, what about the 10 files with other clients? You got to be careful. Same thing with a medical office. Think about it.
Yeah, no, there's a lot here. There's also, I've read in so many different reports, the possibility of tapes. Like that's something that everybody's talking about.
Well, they're talking about that. And then you kind of have to get back to the real fundamentals, which is what exactly is in the search warrant. I mean, a lot of people are offering all kinds of opinions without having seen the affidavit in support of the search warrant. We need to see that. Just like when we were talking about the FISA application, you have to look at it. So the point is, are those tapes?
Will we see that?
Probably not. Certainly for some time, it'll remain under seal, if I had to predict. In most cases, you do see it. But the point is, the lawyers will see it. You know, but the question is, what's the exact scope of what's listed? A search warrant, after all, lists exactly what you're seeking, okay? So the question is this material what they were seeking, or does it go beyond it?
Doug Burns, it sounds like there's an awful lot to fight about here and argue.
Ton to fight about.
Debate. All right, thank you. Appreciate it. All right.
My pleasure.
President Trump is expected to pardon former Dick Cheney aide Scooter Libby today. He was convicted of lying to the FBI in 2007. What could be the fallout? And is the president sending a message to witnesses in the Mueller probe? Plus, we are awaiting President Trump's response to the chemical weapons attack in Syria as his top aides present him with several options. What is our best move? A member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee joins me next.
We don't need independent verification that there's been a chemical attack. 3 nations' intelligence service have already verified that. We've got to go big, and it's got to be decisive, and we got to truly take away the delivery capability that he has.
Fox News alert President Trump weighing a big decision on how to retaliate for that horrific chemical attack in Syria. Defense Secretary James Mattis presenting multiple options to the president yesterday, but White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says a final decision has not been made. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley says the administration is in a difficult position when it comes to determining their best move.
Did a chemical weapons attack happen? Yes. The U.S. has analyzed, yes, it has happened. The UK has analyzed, yes, it has happened. France has analyzed, yes, it has happened. You don't rush decisions like this. If you rush decisions like this, you make a mistake. What we're making sure is that we have all the information to know if we do something, what will happen, how will it happen, and will it hurt anyone?
Chief National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin is live at the Pentagon with the latest. Jennifer.
Melissa, there's another national security meeting at the White House late this afternoon. All eyes will be on that meeting. From the Pentagon's point of view, the various military options were presented to the president yesterday during that nearly 2-hour national security meeting at the White House. It was a menu of options, I'm told, broader and involving more targets than what was presented to the president a year ago after the last chemical weapons attack. Russia's foreign minister called the evidence a hoax, even suggesting UK special forces may have faked it.
Our specialists who examined the area did not find any confirmations of application of chemical weapons, chlorine, or any other kind of poison. Moreover, we have irrefutable evidence that this was another staging which the special services of a certain nation had a hand in, a nation that is trying hard to be in the front row of the Russophobic campaign.
On Friday, a team of chemical weapons inspectors headed into Syria to try to collect evidence. The OPCW, or Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons Inspectors, hope to be on the ground in Douma on Saturday. Defense Secretary Mattis told lawmakers Thursday he needed more proof the Assad regime launched the deadly chemical weapons attack.
I believe there was a chemical attack, and we're looking for the actual evidence.
Ambassador Nikki Haley spoke at the UN moments ago, presented a united front with France and Britain, all of whom have agreed to participate in military action.
There is proof that this happened. But what I will tell you is, as a mother of 2 children, as a wife of a combat veteran, I am unbelievably proud of how President Trump has looked at the information, analyzed, not let anyone rush him into this.
Meantime, the U.S. has added another guided missile destroyer to the Mediterranean and 2 warships with missile capability in the Red Sea. French President Emmanuel Macron called Vladimir Putin today. Any U.S. strikes in Syria risk hitting Russian or Iranian forces. The Syrian military has already moved jets to Russian air bases, protecting them from potential American bombs. The Pentagon wants to know what comes next if a strike is ordered. Melissa?
Jennifer, thank you so much. We want to bring you this breaking news as it's happening right now. We are learning that President Trump has, in fact, pardoned former Dick Cheney Chief of Staff Scooter Libby. This is a statement that is coming from the press secretary right now. Today, President Donald Trump issued an executive grant of clemency that is a full pardon to Scooter Lewis Libby, is a former Chief of Staff to Vice President Richard Cheney for convictions stemming from a 2007 trial. President George W. Bush had commuted this sentence shortly after the conviction. He nevertheless paid a $250,000 fine and performed 400 hours of community service. He also served 2 years probation. In 2015, one of the key witnesses against Mr. Libby recanted her testimony. That's Judith Miller, stating publicly that she believes that the prosecutor withheld relevant information from her during interviews that would have altered significantly what she said. In the next year, the District Court of Columbia Appeals unanimously reinstated Mr. Libby to the bar, reauthorizing him to practice, and the court agreed with the District of Columbia Disciplinary Council, who stated that Mr. Libby had presented credible evidence in support of his innocence including evidence that a key prosecution witness had changed her recollections of the event in question. Before his conviction, Mr. Libby had rendered more than a decade of honorable service to the nation as a public servant and the Department of State, the Department of Defense, and the White House. His record since his conviction is similarly unblemished and continues to be held in high regard by his colleagues and peers. This is all coming from the White House. In light of these facts, the president believes that Mr. Libby is fully worthy of this pardon. I do not know Mr. Libby, said President Trump, but for years I have heard that he has been treated unfairly. Hopefully this full pardon will help rectify a very sad portion of his life. For more now, let's go to Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts, who is live with more. This was expected today, and the discussion will be what are the implications, reading the tea leaves, and all of that.
Well, we were telling you about this this morning, that the president would, at some point in the afternoon, announce that he was pardoning Scooter Libby. A couple of interesting aspects of this. Scooter Libby's attorney was Victoria Tensing, and Victoria Tensing is the wife of Joe diGenova, and the two of them, husband and wife, are now a part of the president's outside legal team in the Russia investigation. That's not to suggest that there was influence there, but there certainly is that connection. And diGenova and Tensing had been lobbying the president to pardon Scooter Libby. A lot of other conservatives had as well, because they think that he was railroaded by a special counsel investigation that ran amok during the Bush administration. This was Patrick Fitzgerald's special counsel investigation into who leaked the name of Valerie Plame, a CIA operative, in terms of the run-up to the war in Iraq. What's most interesting about that whole case is that it started off trying to find out who leaked the name of Valerie Plame. It turned out after about 3 days, everybody knew it was Richard Armitage, the Deputy Secretary of State. But Fitzgerald kept on, as some people think Robert Mueller is, going down rabbit holes, pulling on string to see what was at the other end of that. And he got Scooter Libby in what many people believe was a perjury trap. Scooter Libby insists that he merely forgot the exact date on which he learned about Valerie Plame's name, but by that time, Fitzgerald had him online to investigators in obstruction of justice. Now, the second interesting part of this is you could see this as President Trump sending a message, because you read his statement that he doesn't know Mr. Libby, but for years he has heard that he's been treated unfairly. The president also thinks that Michael Flynn, his former national security advisor, was treated extremely unfairly by the Mueller investigation, and that he was caught in some sort of a perjury trap. So the president could be sending the message here that he believes that Scooter Libby was treated unfairly, but that also Michael Flynn was treated unfairly by a special counsel investigation the White House now firmly believes is out of control. Now, is it possible also, Melissa, that the president is telegraphing his intentions in the overall when it comes to the Mueller investigation, that maybe he'll pardon Flynn? That might be a bridge too far at this point, but certainly I think there's a lot of different things that you can read into what the president has done here today in pardoning Scooter Libby. But I think the biggest thing is saying that a special counsel investigation treated someone unfairly, and the president believes that they deserve to be pardoned. Melissa?
Interesting. All right, John Roberts, thank you. Let's go now to Bill McGurn. He is Main Street columnist for the Wall Street Journal and a former chief speechwriter for President George W. Bush. What's your reaction?
I think it's very good news. I served with Scooter in the Bush White House, so I knew him. I think that, the president's powers of pardon are one of the most unlimited powers, not completely unlimited, in the Constitution. And I think these are the kind of things that they're exercised for. Apart from whether Scooter was guilty or innocent, it sends a message about prosecutorial excess. When there's no underlying crime and then people are indicted for all sorts of other things. Yeah. I think that's very unfair. And I think this is the president, the Constitution gives the president this power specifically to sort of right some wrongs and to redress imbalances that maybe the exact law doesn't allow for.
Let me drill down a few of those pieces there. First of all, you talk about, so a special counsel starts going to look for something, right, and, ends up going down another trail. And right, some would say, well, you go where the evidence leads you. Do you think it's true, and I've heard a couple of people say this recently, that if you went and you looked that deeply at anyone, you would find something illegal that
Yeah,
they did.
I mean,
do you really think that's true?
Yes,
I mean, of all the people in our audience, you and I. You
well,
know,
maybe
I
for
mean,
me,
no,
but I don't want to get the federal prosecutors on me. But I think, look, my view is special counsel's corrupt, independent counsel's corrupt, absolutely. The special counsel is a bad idea, partly because sometimes they go looking for crimes. They're supposed to investigate a crime, but it's sort of find the person first and then find the crime. And I think it's a terrible thing, and not just in the case now, but going back. It's a terrible way to render justice.
So that's a really good way to put it in a nutshell, that I think everybody else would understand the difference. Find a crime and then see who committed it versus find a person.
Right.
And then just dig in
Go
and
look
find
and see what you can
look
find,
through
turn
and
up,
find a
right?
crime on them. That would be very dangerous in our society, because that could very easily be turned on absolutely anyone in our audience. It doesn't matter whether it's
Right.
politics or what it is.
And some of the other critics of the special counsel point out that unlike a special counsel, a regular prosecutor has a lot of other cases. So he has to weigh, is this really going to bear fruit? What's important and what's not? A special counsel is like Inspector Javert from Les Mis, just pursuing this one man as long as they can until he can find a crime to pin on him.
I heard Judy Miller on this morning, and I give her a lot of credit for coming forward and,
Right.
and saying that she made a mistake. And she was talking about that, one of the reasons why this is important, is because in her mind, it kind of was the beginning of the scapegoat and the politicization of some of the things that we hold most dear in this country, and using, sort of these remedies to really go after your political foes in a legal sense, and using our
Right.
institutions.
I didn't see what she said, but my impression is, from knowing her slightly, what she's saying, and she's absolutely right. We don't want to criminalize policy differences, which is
Yes,
what happened.
that's a much better way of saying it, yes.
When I was in the Bush administration, what's happened, I think it's happening now at the same time with the Russia investigation. So these are very, very dangerous things.
Yeah. Criminalizing policy differences. Where do you, because that sounds like we would never do that. Do you see that going on right now?
Yes, I do, because I think that's inherently what a special counsel does. Remember, this special counsel was set up for a counterintelligence investigation, right? Not investigation of a crime. We don't know what the crime. So they have to find the crimes. What's very dissatisfying to people, I think people on both sides have unfortunately come to the conclusion that only indictments, the only answer to misdoing. And I think the Constitution has a different point of view. The Constitution says the president is accountable in two ways. One, at the ballot box, you can vote him out next time he runs or so forth. Two, he can be impeached. That's the proper procedure for investigating a president and his administration. I think impeachment, contempt findings. But instead, sort of a lot of people on both sides, some people want Hillary people indicted, some people want Trump people indicted. Indictments are not a good way to solve political questions, and they lead to a lot of bitterness.
Yeah. Although the special counsel is a means to impeachment. That could be, that's what they're saying.
Not the constitutional mean. I mean, the problem with special counsel, if he's really special, meaning independent of the executive branch, you got some constitutional issues with that, as Justice Scalia pointed out a long time ago. If he's not special, he's just another prosecutor.
Bill McGirt, thank you for your insight as always.
Thank
Great
you.
stuff. All right, for more on this, let's bring in Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin. He serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. Can I get your reaction to the pardoning of Scooter Libby?
Well, this whole case has been filled with all sorts of reasons why you could issue the pardon. There are reasons that could prevent a president from issuing the pardon in this particular case. And now we're looking at over a decade later. The facts are that what happened with Scooter Libby, you do have a special counsel who was running their office amok. There were additional facts that have come to light since this all took place. A pardon doesn't say that Scooter Libby is innocent. It does have consequences. It allows Scooter Libby to be able to move on with his life. And he has done his time. I mean, he was sentenced. There was a commutation, but he did receive a 30-month sentence. He did receive a $250,000 fine, and he's had to live with this for over a decade. And there was more to what took place that, when you look at the scales of justice, you could have handled this entire situation differently originally, and especially with the additional information that came to light afterwards, it's obvious that the special prosecutor at that time didn't have to pursue the course that he did as he did it, and Scooter Libby has an opportunity to move forward with his life.
What message do you think the president is trying to send, if any?
I think he views this case alone on its merits. He has people who are around him who know Scooter Libby well. The president apparently doesn't know Scooter Libby, but people around him do, can talk about his decades of service to our country and all sorts of positive things that happened for our country during Scooter Libby's time. So you take that public service. Now, putting Scooter Libby aside, you do have a special counsel that is out there. I have my own personal opinions as it relates to Michael Flynn, and people are making the connections. In my opinion, the way Michael Flynn was treated was very unfairly. We're learning more about Peter Strzok and his role at the FBI and his anti-Trump bias, and you see Strzok's fingerprints on the documents that are affiliated with ending the Hillary Clinton probe. You see Peter Strzok's fingerprints on the documents that open the Trump-Russia probe, that extend the Trump-Russia probe, that led to an interview with Michael Flynn. So I'm not going to speculate that or make an assumption that there is a connection, but if you were to ask, is there a message to be sent? My own personal opinion, I think that Michael Flynn was absolutely in the right for making the phone calls that he did after the November 2016 election. If you remember why those calls were being made, was that President Obama and his team were trying to get passed through the UN Security Council 2334. This was an anti-Israel Security Council resolution that on the merits shouldn't have been pushed. So you have a transition team trying to set themselves up for success, doing what really is in the best interests of American foreign policy, and then Peter Strzok gets involved in an interview and really tries to, trap Michael Flynn, and they get him someone who also has served decades to our country. I served with Michael Flynn when I was an Army intelligence officer at Fort Huachuca, Arizona.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And it's unfortunate. Yeah, and it's unfortunate how his career ends with something that has the hands of Peter Strzok. So is there a connection? I'm not going to say that there is one. I will say that a message does get sent to the current special counsel now and going forward in the future, is that it's really important, as a previous guest just said, that you don't identify a person and then just try desperately to create a crime from anywhere to try to take someone down. Instead, you should be investigating a crime and just letting the facts go where they may and try to bring these cases to a conclusion, instead of what we're seeing right now, where a case gets started for a very specific purpose, and it prompted by James Comey leaking classified information to the media, which is a crime in and of itself, prompting a special counsel investigation, even though there was no evidence that President Trump had colluded with the Russians. And now you have a 43-headed monster going in all different kinds of directions with no end in sight. So I think it also sends a message, whether it's intended or not, to the justice system, that we should not be identifying people and then desperately trying to find crimes. It's about chasing after crimes.
What do you think about the thought from our last guest that we're kind of getting to a place where it seems like we're criminalizing our political differences?
Well, and really, when I remember watching when Hillary Clinton was getting off for what happened, I was thinking of the person who is a defendant going into court as a defendant before a judge because they made a right-hand turn on red and they got caught. And for all the defendants all across our country, how does it make them feel when there is anyone in this country who is above the law? Everybody should be equal under the law, regardless of what your last name is, regardless of whether you're Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal. Everybody should be treated equally. And what we have seen over the course of the last few years, especially towards the end of President Obama's time in office, was a politicization of the Justice Department, where we were using the Justice Department as a sword for people with political biases. So I think it's important moving forward to level the playing field, treat everybody equally, and never politicize this awesome power that's given to our Justice Department.
How do we do that, though? I mean, because every time you call for a special counsel or pursuant of a crime, the other side feels like they are trying to do justice and that their cause is right, and that, that is what the special counsel is doing. They're investigating a crime, and if they happen to come upon another crime in the pursuit of the previous crime, what's wrong with that? That's where the evidence took them.
Well, in this particular case, the reason why the Trump-Russia probe began was because President Trump won the GOP nomination for president. Now, under the color of some really bad alternative justification that we see in the memo that started the investigation, they really didn't have a good reason, to cover the real purpose for why the investigation was started. It's also clear why the FBI and DOJ didn't want to have the Nunes memo released. It was because they misled a FISA judge. They didn't provide all their facts in order to spy on an American citizen. That's why the Trump-Russia probe continued. And then we just talked about why the special counsel probe started and the way that James Comey triggered that by leaking classified information to the media. So the process needs to be, when you're starting a probe, when you're continuing it, expanding it, if it becomes a special counsel probe, the entire time, it can never be as, Trey Gowdy, talks about how, we're seeing members of the Justice Department where their political bias was overcoming their better judgment. And he's so right with the way he puts that. Those decisions to start, extend, continue, stop, really should have nothing to do with what party you are.
Yeah.
It's on the actual
what outcome
merit.
you think is going to happen in an election, as we are learning from James Comey book. You're a good sport for talking about this because you were coming on as part of the Foreign Affairs Committee to talk to us about the issue in Syria. So I want to move you to that right now and ask you, we understand that along with us, the UK and France also agree that there is enough evidence that this happened, that Assad did once again use chemical weapons on his people. Where does that leave us, in your opinion?
We're seeing with Ambassador Haley's comments the first 3 or so major steps after the chemical weapons attack. One is you want to build a coalition. You're talking to your allies. You're talking to other countries who may be aligned with you on this particular situation, even though you might not, with some of these countries, be aligned on other issues. So we see conversations taking place and working with UK and France and Israel. Jordan has had a role in Syria. There are some very wealthy Arab nations that really do need to be involved. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, other countries could be involved. So part of it is the coalition building. 2 is intelligence sharing, because we all have information, some information that we can share validates the information that other countries have. So that's part of it. 3rd is, once you're building a coalition, you've shared intelligence, you feel good about your conclusions, it's bringing your case to the United Nations and to the international community, because Russia has all sorts of bizarre conspiracy theories as to what happened. First they were blaming the rebels for it. Now I hear that that they might be blaming UK as if Britain was part of designing it. So you need to counter that narrative, because there's also a fight for the legitimacy of the decisions that are going to be made going forward. Now the next step is there's likely going to be a decision that would be to target legitimate military locations, command and control, infrastructure. It could be the Syrian Air Force. It could be the way that they deliver these chemical weapons. It could be where the people who make the decisions are located, so some personnel can be targeted. We do a proportionality test. So if we were going to strike a particular target, would civilians be impacted by that particular strike? And you weigh the proportionality. So I think that a lot of the options that are ahead as far as the path forward are, one, to make sure that they're legitimate, that they are specific, they are targeted, and they also don't get us into a long, drawn-out war, because our country doesn't want it.
No, and that's what so many people are afraid of. Congressman Lee Zeldin, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Melissa.
Well, I was appalled by what Director Comey did. Comey acted in an outrageous way.
He made a mistake. Maybe he's not in the right job.
Well, there you go. The gloves are off ahead of James Comey interview this weekend. President Trump's GOP allies launching an ad campaign attacking the former FBI chief's credibility, labeling him Lion Comey, and even unveiling a mock book cover with fake reviews that slam Comey as a self-serving narcissist. For more on this, let's bring in our power panel. David Avella is chairman of GoPac. Democratic strategist Suraj Patel is a veteran of the Obama and Clinton campaigns and also a candidate for Congress in New York. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Suraj, what do you think?
Look, I think that this website is absolutely beneath the President of the United States to tweet something like this about a private citizen.
But he's got the book, and he's saying, you know, I mean, we're at this point where the mudslinging is very embarrassing on all sides. I think we can all concede that. So what is it? So what does it achieve? And does the GOP trying to counter it out of the gate? Does that work?
Look, I think the president has tried to attack the messenger time and time again instead of addressing the message. The president fired James Comey because of an investigation, and he admitted that to Lester Holt days after he did the firing. And so it's disingenuous of them to say that, you know, this is because the Democrats wanted this or whatever. But what I think is crazy is, you know, when I say Black Lives Matter, right, this very president and his allies tell me that I am denigrating law enforcement. And yet he consistently tweets and attacks the FBI.
I don't want to get too far afield of the book. David, let me go to you. You know, here we are in this back and forth again. You know, I guess the GOP wants to come out and sort of counterman the book before it hits the shelves. Other people are saying there isn't that much that's new in it anyway. So is it important to get out there and have ads and do these kind of things ahead of time, given that there aren't a ton of new revelations in the book, that it's more, you know, sort of the mudslinging, the personal attacks and stuff that people who don't like the president will really enjoy, and people who do like the president won't buy?
Here's the reality. James Comey is one of every other disgruntled employees that has a different understanding of why they were fired than why they were actually fired, which the president had every right to do. He is a will and pleasure employee of the president. And when the president decides you want to go, you're gone.
So why dignify his book with a response then?
Melissa, here, what James Comey does now is he goes out and he makes money giving speeches.
Yep.
And he does interviews. And that's how he now he has his book. That's now how he makes money. The only way he's relevant is to go out and tell his story about his interactions with the president. There is no news here except for stories or interviews if he comes on your show and you ask him about the 2016 election and why he handled it the way he did, which at that time, that's when Democrats hated James Comey. Now they're back in love with James Comey. It's hard to keep up with whether Democrats love James Comey or hate James Comey.
But to your point, you're absolutely right. This is counterproductive. They're absolutely, it's counterproductive for the president to elevate the book for himself, but he did it. And so we are now paying attention to this book way more than I think we would have.
It's James Comey out there trying to make money, as you pointed out. This is sort of his new, way
to make a living.
Right. So there you go. I mean, it's sort of like, does the president need to attack that? He's going to go out and say it. People may buy the book. They won't. What about that point? If he just ignored it, it would go away faster rather than creating these ads.
Conservatives have for decades been told you just sit by the sidelines and you don't respond to this. Okay. Part of the reason why President Trump was appealing to conservatives was because he wasn't going to take the liberal bias that has attacked conservatives for decades. He fights back. Okay. And you either like that or you don't like that. For people who like the president, they're going to like what he's doing.
All right. Hang on one second. We're going to squeeze in a break. The President Trump taking another look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which he pulled out of at the beginning of his presidency, whether that could give him more leverage with China on trade. That's next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dana Perino. We are awaiting the White House briefing as moments ago, the president pardoned Scooter Libby. What kind of message is the president sending? Plus, new reaction to the political food fight over James Comey's book. And have the president and the state of Colorado struck a deal on marijuana? We'll explain on the Daily Briefing.
President Trump is telling his top advisors to take another look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which he pulled out of last year. The trade deal was aimed at putting China at a disadvantage on the global stage and countering Chinese trade abuses. But the commander-in-chief tweeted that he would only re-enter the agreement if it were, quote, substantially better for the United States than it was under President Obama. Here is his economic advisor, Larry Kudlow.
He's taken another look at it. No decisions have been made. You could say it's bad, and I think that as it exists now, it is bad, and I think the president was right to pull out. I don't have any trouble with that. But going forward, maybe it can be approved, maybe not. Maybe it will have market openings for our exports, maybe not. Maybe it will reduce trade barriers for us, maybe not.
Joining me now is Congresswoman Diane Black. She is a member of the House Ways and Means Committee and the Budget Committee as well. Thank you for joining me. You know, there are some that say that this deal has gone ahead without the U.S. and to come back now, they might not even want us at this point, that they've just moved on. Do you buy that?
I don't buy that. I think that they're very interested in the American products, and I think that there's an opportunity here for us to be able to, especially with my state, looking at agriculture as being so important to our state, that this may be an opportunity for us, especially for our beef and pork producers and some of the other things like soybeans. I'm glad that the president is at least opening the door. As Mr. Kudlow said, it may or may not benefit us, and if it doesn't, I think the president will say we're out.
The point of it was supposed to be, though, to band together to attack China's advantage in all of these different trade policies, which is what the president says he wants to do anyway. He wants to start to get tough on China. So why did he not like this?
Well, because there were certain areas, and I've already mentioned a couple of those. One of them was beef, one of them was rice, and we were not being treated fairly along those lines. I am on the Ways and Means Committee. We know under Ambassador Froman that we continued to let him know there were certain things that were non-negotiable because we were not being treated fairly, and that we would not see our way through this. And obviously when the president got elected and he saw what was happening, he pulled out. And there were good reasons for that. I will tell you, we never really felt comfortable when it was being negotiated under the former ambassador that we were in the right place, and that he would not have had the votes for it here in the House of Representatives.
You know, what you're talking about sounds very similar to what the president said, whether it's dealing with China or it's dealing with all these other Asian partners, that we were at a disadvantage. How the heck did that happen when we are, you know, this huge nation with all this power and all these goods and all these consumers, and how did we lose advantage in all of these different trade deals, if that's the case, how it is?
I think because we haven't been strong in making those trade deals. We have to stand up and look, like it or not, we have a president that is a strong president, and he is a negotiator, and he's done this in his business world, and that's what he's doing here. We have not had people that have pushed back, and I really did feel that way under previous ambassadors, that they were not pushing the way we needed those trade representatives to push. And when that happens, these stronger countries, and obviously China is a very strong country, there are strong negotiators there in Japan, that we would not get what we deserve, and we get into a trade deal that is not really beneficial to our producers.
When I interview people who defend those old deals or disagree with what you say, they always say that there is more at stake than the dollars and cents. And the reason why some of those deals look like they're a financial disadvantage is because we were trying to build relationships or get advantages in other ways. How do you respond to that argument?
I'm not in the middle of whatever the negotiation was when they were making those negotiations. I can just tell you, as being on the Ways and Means Committee, and we of course have trade as our number one, well, I wouldn't say maybe number one, but certainly at the top of our priorities, that I have watched that we have not always negotiated strongly the way we need to. And I actually traveled around the country and spoke to some of these countries, and I know that we were not seen as strong as what we need to be seen, as at least not as strong as what those people were toward us.
Seems that way. Representative Diane Black, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We are awaiting the White House press briefing. Should be an exciting one, to say the least, where we expect more reaction to James Comey's tell-all book and the president's pardon of former Dick Cheney aide Scooter Libby. We're going to have it for you live when it begins.